I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
That
was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time. I hope that you are ashamed of the future that you contributed for your children and for ours, and I ask all of you to resign. For years, we have been asked to turn a blind eye to the criminality, corruption, and blatant disregard to the rule of law by the tyrant president we have in the White House. We as a nation can no longer look away. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
That
was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry.
Whether under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question, because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. In 1998, the Global Climate Science Communication Team produced, quote, action plan outlining a strategy to conduct a coordinated misinformation campaign on climate change. Mr. Woods, an Exxon employee, was involved in developing this plan, this action plan, right?
As I said, I'm not familiar with that activity. It was 20 years ago. So
okay, and Mr. Wright, is that the same for you? Do you know if these employees were involved in creating this action plan?
I don't have information about the instance that you are making reference to, Congresswoman.
Okay. Again, on page 2 of that action plan lists these employees. The plan explained that, quote, victory, end quote, would be achieved when, quote, average citizens understand uncertainties
in climate science, end quote. And recognition of that uncertainty, quote, becomes part of the conventional wisdom. We've heard today that Exxon executives were warned about the reality of the climate change as early as the 1970s. But it seems very clear that they did. The fossil fuel industry worked collectively to prevent action on climate change. They coordinated their campaigns with groups like the Global Climate Science Communication Team. Their efforts at disinformation were conscious and deliberate. Over the past 3 decades, the fossil fuel industry has continued their efforts by making $780 million in political donations, with 80% of those donations going to Republicans. In 2020 alone, the industry made $139 million in donations to candidates and committees, of which 84% went to Republicans and mostly climate deniers. It is yet another reason we need to get the fossil fuel money out of our politics. Fossil fuel companies have polluted our air, land, and water for profit, despite knowing the devastating impact it has on our companies. It seems like you all have achieved that victory of leading the public with disinformation. And as one of my colleagues said earlier, I hope that you are ashamed of the future that you contributed for your children and for ours, and I ask all of you to resign. With that, I yield back, Madam Chairwoman.
Let us not mince words about what happened last week. It was a violent attempt to interrupt our democratic process. It was a targeted blow at the most essential process that makes us a democracy. It was a direct and specifically incited by the President of the United States. For years, we have been asked to turn a blind eye to the criminality, corruption, and blatant disregard to the rule of law by the tyrant president we have in the White House. We as a nation can no longer look away. The president not only incited an insurrection against our government, but has in word and deed led a rebellion.
As a child, I lived through a violent civil war that destroyed my home, ripped my family apart from each other, and killed many of my family and friends. I can still remember being just 8 years old, hiding under the bed, hearing bombs go off outside my window, and wondering if we were going to be hit next. The truth is that this is not a conflict between two states. This is not a civil war. It is a conflict where one country, funded and supported by the United States government, continues an illegal military occupation over another group of people.